This is my Blooming Marvellous tote, and you can see what a pretty, very simple but really effective bit of patchwork you have here with the hexagon shapes and these folded pieces of fabric that actually make it look like rosebuds or petals. It's so pretty. With the main bag in your book, you can see that I've just had the hexagons just off to one side. It gives it an asymmetrical, a very modern kind of look. But if you wanted to, you could actually make the whole tote just covering the whole of the front of it with these gorgeous flowers. And then of course you've got your Blooming Marvellous purse to go with it. And on this one I've just selected one of the roses and used this as a piece of applique on the front of my purse. So it's very easy to make these. This is how we're going to do it. So I've already cut out my pieces to make one of the hexagons. So the backing is simply some calico or a cheap cotton or something plain, maybe a piece of sheeting, something that you're not really going to see. So that's going to be my base. I'm going to put one piece of the backing behind this one. We'll just do one individual rose with this tutorial. And then I've already cut out all of these pieces of fabric and folded those in half. Now if you really wanted to give this some dimension, if you start with the darker colours in the centre and then work out, or start the opposite way around with the lighter colours in the centre and work out to a darker, you can really create a lovely visual effect. But this time I'm just going to kind of randomly add a combination of florals, of darks, of lights, and I've got some bias binding strips in there as well, which are just spare little scraps that I had left over that I just thought would make that pretty. When it makes the pattern stand out when you put something plain behind it, basically. So I'm going to need a square of fabric to go right there in the centre, and then we can start putting all of these together. I'm just going to use a little bit of repositionable spray fabric adhesive to hold that square in place. And make sure it's fabric adhesive if you are using any kind of glues with your sewing machine, because these have been designed to go with your sewing machine, so they're not going to damage it, because obviously the needle is going to be passing through that glue. And that's just going to go in the centre here. And then we're going to start the fun bit, so we're going to start building up the design. So I'm going to start with one of my peach colours, and we just need to make sure that the edge of that square is overlapping. And to start with, I'll build this up in threes. Now these can overlap as much as you like. You could put 4 on there, you can put 5 on there if you wanted to. In fact, I think I might need 4 on this one just to cover over the edges. But the idea is to put them on there randomly, so you don't have a uniform square in the centre. And then as you can see, we just start to build this up by taking all of those strips of fabric round and round to create my floral design. But let's do these one at a time. So let's bring the sewing machine in. There we go, and start to sew. So there's no need to pin or tack or baste or anything with these. Let's just get sewing. So at an angle slightly over one edge, and I'm going to sew this close to the raw edge. So my folded edge is facing inwards, and I'm just sewing across that raw straight edge there. Then my next strip overlaps like so. This is a great one of those projects for those of you that are maybe new to sewing. You want to create something beautiful, but you're not too confident about sewing in a straight line. Well, you don't even see your stitches on here because the next piece of fabric is going to overlap it. So all you're going to see is the folded edge. So it's a great one for you. And of course you could make these in any size that you wanted to. So these are 2-inch hexagons, it could be 3-inch hexagons, 4-inch hexagons. Could do little tiny ones if you wanted to, but of course that's going to be a little more time consuming. Just making sure that those are really not at too much of a perfect angle. You don't hear that very often in sewing, do you? Then we're going to carry on just building this up all the way around until the whole of that area is finished. So let's pop one of those white ones on here. The next layer again is going to be at a slightly different angle, and I just want to make sure that all of my edges, my stitched edges, are covered up. I'm not worried about these actually being larger than the hexagon, because we'll trim those down to size in just a second when we come to the end. And there we go. So you see what I mean about all of these edges overlapping. So as I'm going, you're not going to see those the raw edges that I'm sewing, or the stitches even that I'm sewing. Just keep overlapping those as you go. One more of the plain ones. I think I'll finish off that row. And then a couple of more rows and we're probably finished with this one. There we go. Let's put a green layer around here now, so that can go across here. And we just keep going round and round. Every one of these is going to be slightly different as well, which is really lovely when you see them all together, and they all look quite similar because they're similar colours, but no two rosebuds exactly the same, just like in nature really. So that's how we're looking at the moment. So you can see all of the hexagon shape is covered over with the petals. What I need to do now is to just trim back those petals to the same size as the hexagon, and you can actually see from the back that it has all been covered, so there's no hexagon bit showing. So let's trim this back. If you have a rotary cutter and ruler, you may find that simple to do as well. So I'm just using the edge of the hexagon as a guide now and just trimming back all of those edge pieces, like so. Okay, don't worry about these becoming a little bit loose, because when we start to sew them all together, that'll hold all of the edges. If you're going to make one of the bags with more than one of the hexagon, you can just join these together like two pieces of patchwork, two patchwork hexagons. If you start and stop 1/4 of an inch from the corner, then you'll find that they sit together very nicely as you put them together. If you're going to make the diagonal hexagon shapes like this, when you come to the edge, you're going to need to neaten the edge, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do now. And indeed, if you're making the Blooming Marvellous purse, or if you're just using one single rose, this is how we're going to do that. So all I've done is taken a second hexagon just from some cheap fabric, and we're going to sew those the right sides together. I'm using quite a small stitch because when I turn this the right side out, it will be put under a little bit of strain, so that makes it a stronger stitch. And literally sew all the way around the hexagon shape, keeping that seam allowance uniform. I'm using 1/4 of an inch. Right, then let's take this out. And I need to turn it the right side out. So if your fabric is very bulky, you may find it a little bit easier just to snip across those points, like so. And then on that lining side, or the side that we've just sewn on, we're going to make a hole just across the centre. And then we'll turn the whole thing the right side through. So just push out those corners. This is the back of the flower, remember, so you're not actually going to see any of that hole when you sew the whole pieces together, or use this as a plique. So I'll just take my tweezers and push out those corners. There we go. They will go a little bit round because of the bulk of the fabric that you have here, because you imagine there's quite a few layers that we're looking at now. One final corner here. There you go. And there you have your flower. So I would press the edges of that. I wouldn't press the very centre because it's quite nice to have that depth and that shape. It almost gives it a dimension. I'd press the very edges and just make sure that the seam is right across the end before you sew. And then I would hand sew my applique onto either the purse or onto my tote bag, just using a tiny little slip stitch around the edge, so that's as invisible as you can possibly make it. But I just think it's such a really pretty technique, and of course when you've made up your rose like this, it doesn't even have to go onto a tote bag. It could be on a hairband, it could be on a belt, it could be on a lapel, a little girl's dress or a pocket. So as you can see, it's a really useful, very pretty technique that you've just learnt how to do.